ありがとうございます。Make sure that you can all hear me. It's an absolute delight to be here. It's a delight to be here amongst distinguished guests, amongst so many men and women, and a few friends. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the women leaders that are going back to their international homes to try and progress the issues in their own countries for women. Can you hear me? When I was a child, my mother would read me a story. The title was The Little Red Hen. In this tale, the little red hen finds a grain of wheat and asks the other farmyard animals with whom she lives to help her plant it. The animals refused to help. It came time to harvest the grain, and again she asked the animals for help, and again they refused. "Will you help me," she asked, "to thresh and mill the wheat into flour?" The animals still refused. At last, it was time to bake the flour into bread. "Well, who of you should like to help me?" she asked. And yet again, they refused. As a result of her effort, what was once a grain of wheat is now a lovely, warm loaf of bread. The smell is quite fantastic. She asks the farmyard animals who will help her eat the bread. This time, all those who denied her the help, all those who stayed quiet, put up their hands eagerly, awaiting their piece of the warm bread. At this point in the story, she takes great pleasure in refusing their help to devour the bread, and instead she shares it with her chicks. The moral of this story may seem harsh, but it is also not entirely unreasonable. Should those who do not contribute to a better outcome enjoy the benefits of those who toil to make it so? In answering this question for myself, I remind myself that there are those who do not have the vision to see the opportunity for change. There are those who do not have the courage to implement it. And that there are those who do not have the influence to encourage those to adopt a new way. So for those of us who do, for those of us who are sitting in this very room, there is a responsibility to lay the foundations for all to enjoy. Unlike the little red hen, we must share the reward of our labour. In this story, the little red hen does not take the lack of participation as a sign that the project is not worthy. She's not dissuaded by the lack of support. She is convinced that the benefits will outweigh the effort. And I guess this is how I see the journey for women over decades. There have been men and women before me who have been prepared to light the torch and carry it, the glow from which I am now a beneficiary. It is therefore an honour that I have been asked to stand before you as a room of change makers to talk about ways in which we can improve the opportunities and the prosperity for women. It is a pleasure to share with you the work of so many in Australia who are working hard to not just lay the seeds for change, but to tend the garden, to harvest the wheat, so that we may all enjoy the bread that this yields. I hope not only to provide information, but also to inspire those among you who have the energy, who have the wisdom and influence to go back to your respective homes, workplaces, government posts, and other positions of influence, and find a way to make it better for women and ultimately for your society. So what is the opportunity seen by Australia for Australia? Australia is currently going through a significant period of change and development. We've been very fortunate to possess the resources that the world needs. We are by far the largest exporter of iron ore to China, accounting for nearly half of China's iron ore imports. So it's no surprise that Chinese-Australian diplomatic relations reached a new high earlier this year. I had the honour of being part of the business delegation that accompanied the Prime Minister and so witnessed some of the discussions firsthand. We are one of the largest exporters globally of a number of other hard commodities. Yet, we realise that we must develop other pillars of strength alongside resources to underpin our economy for the benefit of economic and social prosperity. We must strengthen other parts of our economy in order to reduce our reliance on these resources. This includes areas such as financial services, where Australia has about the third or fourth largest pool of managed funds in the world. It also includes areas such as agriculture, education, inbound tourism, innovation, and technology. So with this in mind, the discussion of diversity in Australia focuses not only on equity and equality, but on economic rationale. To build a stronger and more diverse economy will require a stronger and more diverse workforce. If we want a more productive Australia, if we want a more robust economy, then Australia has finally begun to understand we cannot simply afford to squander our talent. This means that we cannot ignore the talent that resides within our women. If we are to sustain our prosperity and build on what are very strong foundations, we're going to need to enjoy the perspectives brought by both men and women. So in short, for some, the issue of having more women participate in executive roles and in leadership is seen as an opportunity as opposed to a problem. They represent a pool of talent and experience and perspective that is critical to our future success. A couple of years ago, the figures were grim, almost everywhere you looked. In government, academia, law, corporate Australia, the figures showed that the number of women that made it to leadership roles was unacceptably low. On Australia's stock exchange, the ASX, only 2% of the top 200 companies were chaired by women. Only 4 had female CEOs. Only 8.3% of the non-executive directors were women, and only 10.7% of the executive management positions were female. And yet, for many of these companies, nearly half of their customers are women. Indeed, for some, including banks and insurers, as well as major retailers, more than half of the customer buying decisions lie with the women. In fact, some statistics show that Australia is heading backwards. Indeed, it has been said that Australia has been leading the world in going backwards. In 2004, Norway implemented a quota system. A quota system for board membership for state and municipal companies, requiring 40% membership by females by 2006. Similar requirements were subsequently enacted for public companies. And by 2008, they had magically found the women, and most were compliant with these requirements. At the same time, the world's financial system had been thrown into significant turmoil by a meltdown in financial markets, particularly in the US and Europe. From the very outset, this was the worst financial and economic crisis the world had seen in a century. Indeed, I remember calling our team together at Pottinger, many of them well below 40, and telling them to pay close attention to what happened, because I certainly hoped that these events were so extreme that they would not see them again for the rest of their working lives. Despite this uncertain economic outlook, Australia's economy remained relatively strong. Unemployment was low by global standards, and wages continued to rise strongly. Faced with challenges local and global, Australia began to ask itself some serious questions. Would the financial crisis have been less severe if management teams in financial institutions had been less dominated by aggressive, bonus-seeking executives, a peer group that was almost entirely and exclusively male? How could we make better use of Australia's talent pool? Was the composition of boards and management teams fair? Was the composition effective? If they didn't reflect the underlying customer base, indeed, if they weren't diverse at all when measured by gender, age, ethnicity, or even international experience, were shareholders' interests really being well protected? With disturbing empirical evidence that Australia was failing to improve diversity, the country set about to attempt to drive real change. As often is the case, not everyone participates. Some actively refuse to help. Others simply remained silent. Others quietly accepted the status quo and at best the very slow rate of change, not wanting to rock the boat. As I said before, it takes vision and courage to change a system. So with this as context, I'll talk to you about what Australia is actually doing to improve our future prospects by improving the opportunities for its women. I'd like to start by referring to the Australian Human Rights Commission, established in 1986 by an Act of Federal Parliament of Australia. The Commission is an independent statutory organisation that reports to Parliament through Australia's Attorney General. The mission of the Commission includes making human rights values part of everyday life and language, ensuring that all people understand and exercise their human rights. We've got 6 commissioners. One is responsible for the welfare of children, one for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social justice. The others have responsibility for the prevention of discrimination, with one assigned each to age, disability, race, and finally, gender. One of these 6 commissioners, Elizabeth Broderick, is the Sex Discrimination Commissioner and is tasked with advancing the cause of gender equality in Australian society. Her mandate is enshrined in law. In other words, she does not represent government, she does not represent business, nor a union. This independence is seen as a fundamental asset to her work. If she was here today, she would tell you that the innovation behind change often occurs at the intersection of different stakeholders. She would tell you that in order to progress and achieve true reform, we have to find the common ground and be able to demonstrate mutual benefit to these different groups. Her role and the way in which she has tackled it has led to historic developments. In preparation for my speech today, I asked Elizabeth if she would share with us what she sees as a definition of success in her role. She said, and I repeat, "It is when women's representation at all levels is commensurate with our demographic representation. When we have that, we have a true meritocracy." Many of us, including Elizabeth Broderick, have looked closely at the statistics, have looked at the inequity, and have looked at the wasted talent. With the evidence so clearly showing us the need for change, it was clear that systemic intervention was necessary. This could have come in the form of quotas, or it could have come by asking companies to disclose publicly the number of women in leadership roles or executive positions. But actually, what we have introduced is a hybrid of the two, and it is now embedded in the Australian Stock Exchange's corporate governance principles, which took effect in 2011. In summary, the principles state that entities listed on the exchange must disclose the following in their annual report: their achievement against gender objectives as set by the board, and the proportion of women on their board, in senior management, and throughout the entire organisation. Companies are required to adopt the new recommendations or to explain in the annual report why it is that they have not done so. You may ask, why was this considered as one of the first important steps? I'm sure, like some of you, I have spoken to influencers and lawmakers in many countries, whether it be Asia, North and South America, the Middle East, Europe and Africa, and nearly everyone agrees that power usually resides where the money is. And in Australia, undeniably, the money lies with our stock exchange, and so too does a significant part of the power. But wisdom also dictates that to effect significant change, we'd need multiple approaches. The stock exchange guidelines in of themselves would be insufficient. The guidelines told companies where they needed to get to, but didn't give them the map or the instructions for how to get there. So there are a number of other significant initiatives focused on providing the support and the directions to help us get to this worthwhile destination. A destination where there is true gender diversity in the workplace and at every level. These initiatives fall into a few broad categories. Some advocate for women. Some are focused on having better representation of women on boards or in executive levels. Some support women in particular industries. Some are focused at a company level, encouraging and nurturing talent within their own organisations. And some are focused on building the talent of pipeline. Elizabeth Broderick's vision in 2010 was that if you could persuade Australia's most influential and diverse male CEOs and their equivalents in the government sector to become strong advocates of the benefits of diversity, then change could be achieved much more rapidly. This meant engaging the men who led iconic companies like Telstra, Australia's main telecommunications company, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Australia's largest bank, government secretaries, and even the Chief of Army. And so, the Male Champions of Change was born. The rationale for this group was clear. While women had been leading the charge, involving men was critical. If we wanted to see real change, we needed the men to play their part. Without the avid support of men who currently dominate our leadership and control most of the financial and other resources, progress was going to be far from assured. Elizabeth Broderick made a personal plea to these champions. She asked them, will you use your power and influence, your collective voice and wisdom to create change for women? These men have sent over 150,000 copies of a letter urging other men and businesses to support the progress of women. They have set aside time in their diaries to speak at dozens of major events in Australia and internationally. Their public message is clear. This is not a woman's issue. It is one of the most important business imperatives for our nation and indeed the globe. The Chief of the Australian Army is one of these champions. He has taken on a formidable task to tackle the culture and the norms of the Defence Force to ensure better opportunities and outcomes for women. In 2011, when the Australian military was front-page news after a sex scandal, the Minister for Defence asked Elizabeth to head up a review into the treatment of women in the Defence Force. She was asked to examine and make recommendations about gender equality and safety issues and initiatives to increase the number of women in leadership. All of the 21 recommendations have been accepted, which is remarkable. In many ways, the military is the archetypal male-dominated industry. Although it functions differently to many other workplaces, they have understood that their workforce faces the same choice as businesses in Australia. It must attract the very best talent, fit for managing the challenges of tomorrow as opposed to those of yesterday. So in 2013, when a further set of potential sex offences was uncovered in the Australian Defence Force, the Chief of Army, Lieutenant General David Morrison, posted a video on YouTube. The title was simply, Chief of Army, Message Regarding Unacceptable Behaviour. Doesn't sound strong, but in his message he called out the behaviour as despicable. He says, I have stated categorically many times that the Army has to be an inclusive organisation in which every soldier, man and woman, is able to reach their full potential and is encouraged to do so. Those who think it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues has no place in this Army. And if that does not suit you, he says, get out. He also told anyone not willing to work with women and accept them as equals, there is no place for you amongst this band of brothers and sisters. The video has been watched nearly 1.4 million times around the world and praised from men and women alike. While the advocates, including men, are spreading the message, there are a number of organisations that are focusing on getting more women on boards. These include Women on Boards and the Australian Institute of Company Directors and the government initiative called Board Links. Government action, both at a federal and a state level, has been amongst the most assertive, with a forceful attempt to improve representation over recent years. In 2010, the federal government set a target of 40% female representation, and no less than 40% male representation either, across all federal government boards by 2015. 2 of the 7 board directors on Australia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, that's 28% are female. A third of the governors of Australia's Reserve Bank are women. A third of the external advisory panel to ASIC, Australia's corporate regulator, are female. In fact, as at the 30th of June this year, 41.7% of all Australian government board positions were held by women. The Australian Institute of Company Directors is an organisation in Australia focusing on directors and their development. They implemented a mentoring program in 2010 where senior directors mentored women who were board ready. The program aims to assist participants in the program to develop connections with influential business leaders, gain knowledge and skills that will assist them in achieving director appointments, and to increase their understanding of how company boards work. Since its inception, this program has worked with over 200 women. The Business Council of Australia, which is an association of the CEOs of 100 of Australia's leading corporations, also launched a mentoring program in 2011, with a focus on boosting the number of women in CEO and CFO roles in the ASX 200. Also, there is support for women in executive management roles, with associations in Australia that have been established to provide support and networks to women in particular industries, with a significant focus on middle management. Examples include women in banking and finance, women in engineering, women in mining, in media, and in information technology or IT. A number of major organisations who are genuinely committed to the change and improvement have also commenced specific programs in their own workplaces aimed at supporting and nurturing this talent, and indeed other segments of the community that are poorly represented in their workforce. Despite this significant effort over recent years, however, reports show that 47 of Australia's top 200 companies still have no female executives at all. So, the final group of initiatives that I will talk about now are those aimed at increasing the number of women ready for the most senior roles. As we are often referring to it in Australia, this means increasing the number of women in the pipeline. Ensuring that women continue on the leadership pathway is critical. It is critical to assuring that there is a ready pipeline of talent for our senior executive and board ranks. Around the world, many people have written about the glass ceiling, an impermeable barrier to their women's career development beyond a certain level. To help address this challenge and to help corporate Australia ensure that more of the excellent female talent, 1 or 2 levels below executive management team, make it the whole way, my company launched a pro bono initiative called the Glass Elevator. The objective is to help some of the best talent nationally break through the glass ceiling for the benefit of the entire economy. In particular, our hope was that by creating networks, conversations and professional development opportunities for women, that we would inspire and engage them and increase the likelihood that they'd want to stay, that they'd want to continue into the most senior leadership roles. Like many ideas, its effectiveness comes from its simplicity. It has also received fantastic support from CEOs of many of the largest Australian companies, including BHP, Qantas, Wesfarmers and Woolworths, as well as numerous leading multinationals such as BP, eBay, Kraft, McDonald's, Microsoft, Shell, Unilever, Vodafone, the list goes on. Indeed, the program has been so successful that we've been asked to run programs offshore, which we're planning to launch in the next 6 months. We've also placed a strong emphasis on creating a ripple effect. In other words, encouraging the participants in this program to help others at more junior levels through a variety of initiatives. Pottinger was asked to go forward, to go further and establish executive circles for senior women, each group being chaired by a well-respected and senior business figure. They facilitate discussion in small groups so that women can connect, discuss various areas of interest, including development, leadership and other business and personal challenges, and be mentors for each other in a confidential environment. And then, of course, there are campaigns that go viral. The latest movement asks the very simple question, 50-50. If not, why not? The lessons are all really quite simple. As is often the case, effective initiatives are uncomplicated. By harnessing the energy and wisdom of people who care, we can achieve a great deal surprisingly quickly. But there is something that can be done even earlier. If we want to help our society change at a more fundamental level, then we need to start with education and go right back to the beginning with early childhood education. So Australia is considering making, and in some cases has made, changes to the national school curriculum, including some elements of gender framing. The idea behind the change is simply that from the age of 4 years and up, we want to remove those inbuilt assumptions. Hand in hand with these programs and initiatives that I've mentioned above, we mustn't forget the importance of celebration of role models. This is an area in which the media has played a very important role. In Australia, we have had some prominent female journalists, Catherine Fox and Narelle Hooper, who have been prepared to write not only about the issues that must be addressed, but also to make sure that the successes of women are not overlooked. These same 2 influential female journalists, together with a large Australian bank and a significant newspaper, have joined forces to create the Women of Influence Awards, to ensure that women of power and influence are celebrated. I've only mentioned a few of the initiatives that are underway, but with these alone, we have actually seen some improvement. As of September this year, 16.3% of directors on ASX 200 boards were female, up from 8.3% in 2008. There is an increased awareness in the media, in government and in business circles of the business case for change. However, we also note that there is some evidence that the rate of change is starting to slow. While 28% of new appointments to ASX 200 company boards in 2011 were female, in 2012, women represented just 24% of new appointments. As Pottinger's analysis has repeatedly highlighted, with an appointment rate of just 24%, the target of having 40% of women on boards will simply never, ever be met. So in Australia, we realise that more must be done. And the same is true in many countries around the world. If countries want to maximise their economic productivity and economic growth potential, more must be done. If global companies want their boards to understand their 50% female customer bases better, then more must be done. Here in Japan, more, much more, must be done. Prime Minister Abe has highlighted that less than 2% of all board members at Japan's top companies were female, compared to 11.1% at foreign companies. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Rankings provides a ranking of 135 countries, examining factors such as economic participation, opportunity, educational attainment, health survival, and political empowerment. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the table's topped by Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. Indeed, these countries have formed the top 4 now for some time. Australia ranks 25th. Our ranking has gone backwards over some years. Japan ranks 101st. Rather than seeing this as a failure, see it as an opportunity. An opportunity to unlock significant economic growth and improved social welfare through making much more of the talents and capabilities of the underutilised half of the workforce. Companies such as Lawson are leading the way, appointing 3 women to its 9-person board. Government programs and private sector initiatives are looking to unlock the potential of female entrepreneurs. Around the world, some of the greatest entrepreneurs have been women. Think of this extraordinary success and influence of Oprah Winfrey as just one example. As Hitoshi Masuda, leader of the Japan is Back campaign, said a couple of weeks ago, women are Japan's great underused asset. They will be a driving force in building a stronger economy based on entrepreneurship. On the journey from Sydney to Tokyo, I thought about my own life's journey and how it had brought me to Japan. For the first time back in 1999, and then in 2001 to live and work in Tokyo, and yesterday so that I could partake in these tremendously important meetings. I reflected that I was born with a great gift, the gift of life. I was born with a strong heart and mind. My parents instilled in me the importance of using these gifts for good. I know that if I want to be part of a better world, then I must play my part. I must make my contribution. I must also encourage others to do the same and to share the vision that I see clearly that a more diverse workforce with greater female participation at all levels means a stronger one, better leadership, better decisions, and higher growth. But for me to be able to do all this, it's not simply enough that I give myself the permission. It's not simply enough for me to give the people in my own business permission to make the most of their potential. I know that I also need the permission of the broader business community around me, many of them men. As Melinda Gates once said, a woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman. But the search to find that voice can be remarkably difficult. So I'd like to ask a few things to the women in the audience. We have often heard the expression that behind every man is a strong woman, or perhaps a stronger woman. Then I ask you that so should there behind every strong woman be a stronger woman. Please make sure that you go out and support other women. And to the men, I ask you to go back to your organisations and respective posts and think about how much economic prosperity can be unlocked for Japan if you can set this untapped female resource free. Go back to your organisations and homes and give permissions to the women around you to succeed. Then go beyond that and encourage your female colleagues and friends, daughters and nieces that anything is possible if you are determined and you have the right support. Give them that permission and give them the support. In the words of Edith Wharton, there are 2 ways of spreading the light: to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it. Thank you.